we'll have some people who are joining late, but I want to say hello to everyone and call the meeting officially to order. I'm Constance Nestor, and I've had the privilege of chairing the Scottish American History Forum these last 9 years, and I'd like again to wish you all a very hearty welcome. Gus Noble, who is the president of Caledonia and Chicago Scots, is unable to be with us today, but we do have Alan Garraway, one of the Board of Governors members with us. And Paul Melville or Charles Gonzalez, are either of you on yet today? But Alan, I think what I'd like to do is call on you. Maybe you can give a brief update on what's going on at Caledonia and just greet our group today, if you don't mind. And we can't see your face at the moment. Don't know whether you'd like to come back on camera. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, this is rather unprepared. Obviously, the Caledonia Senior Living is continuing to progress very well and continues to be a safe haven from the COVID virus. All of our residents are well, and we have work underway to update and improve some of our facilities as we continue to reopen our doors. In terms of the Society and the Chicago Scots, we've got a couple of upcoming events. We've got on September the 20th, the 20th annual Kilted Classic. Jack can fill me in on any details that I screw up here. That's taking place at Cantini Golf Club. Charlie Gonzalez is chairing that event, and we're looking forward to a full event. Although we're not hosting an indoor dinner this year, we're having an outdoor appetizer buffet and drinks after the round whilst the awards are being made. And then the 176th annual dinner is scheduled for Friday, December the 3rd at the Chicago History Museum. That is still somewhat fluid. We'll continue to monitor that as our opportunities to meet together expand during the later months of the year. So that's basically the main headlines of what's going on.
Very, very good, Alan. Thank you. And I don't know whether we have any newcomers on this morning with us, but Chicago Scots, formerly the Illinois St. Andrew Society, is the oldest charitable organization in the state of Illinois, founded in 1845. And of course, our charity has always been our Scottish Old People's Home, which is now our Caledonia Senior Living and Memory Care Campus. So thank you, Alan. I have a couple more.
I should also say that we are in the middle of a membership drive. As we were founded in 1845, we're trying to get 1,845 members between now and the annual feast. And that membership is free of charge to anyone who wants to go to the Chicago Scots website and register.
Yes, and that website is www.chicagoscots.org. So it's so simple. And please come in and join, and then you'll receive all the information on all of the events. Also, with this new membership drive, we're going to have a new member welcome toast meeting. And I'm sorry?
No, this is the Scottish Fiddle talk.
Could I ask everybody to mute
But
your...
all they've been doing so far is talking about St. Andrew Society activities.
May I ask everyone to mute your microphones, please, if you're not presenting? That would be very helpful. But we will be having a new member welcome toast meeting via Zoom on September 15th from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. when Gus Noble will talk to everyone about our mission and how you can get more involved and meet other members. So again, it's free, and we'd love to have you join. I am hoping to reinforce what Alan said. I'm hoping you'll all come out to our fun and frolic associated with the Kilted Classic golf tournament. It's going to be at Cantigny Park at the golf course in Wheaton this year. And you'll also, if you come out, have an opportunity to tour former Scottish American Robert R. McCormick's home place and estate and participate in other park activities. So it's really great fun, and we'll hope to see you there. And then just briefly, next month here with our Scottish American History Forum, David Forsyth will be joining us on October 2nd. And he is a senior curator at the National Museum Scotland in Edinburgh. And he's going to talk to us about signs, symbols, and sedition, the material culture of the Jacobites. So that should be very exciting. So now I think it's time to go ahead and move into our presentation. And we are truly blessed, I'll have to use the word blessed, to have celebrated violinist and fiddler Alistair McCulloch with us here today to discuss Scottish fiddle music and the art and the legacy, and along with providing a few demonstrations. And so, Alistair, I'd prefer if you'll introduce yourself, please. We'd love to know a little bit more about you and what you're doing. But before Alistair begins, I'd like to call on Jack Sanders, who's going to state the logistics surrounding the History Forum presentation today. Jack?
Thank you, Connie. Morning, everyone. We got a pretty good crowd here. This is great. So we are going to be starting. So first of all, we're recording right now, just so everybody knows. And Alice is going to be giving his presentation and giving us a demonstration, some demonstrations. And of course, we all want to be able to hear it without any sort of background noises. So I'll ask everyone to go on mute at this time. And then after Alistair is done with his presentation, we'll have a Q&A portion. And if you have a question that you think of in the middle of the presentation and you just, you want to remember it, you can write it in the chat and we'll address it. We'll address it during the Q&A portion. But for now, I think we are set.
Well, and Jack, if I could ask everybody to also dim your video cameras, it would be nice if we could see Alistair on the big screen, Jack, if you can finesse that.
I just pinned him. Yep.
Thank you.
Hi, Alistair.
Alistair.
Well, good morning, everyone. Afternoon here. It's just gone 4:05 in the afternoon in Scotland. So it's my pleasure to be with you today. And I had the pleasure of visiting Chicago about 2 years ago. And a tour with a very famous fiddle, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about later. But I'm going to present to you today Scots Fiddle, the Art and the Legacy. And before I start the presentation, I'm going to play a little tune just to make sure we can all hear. So here we go. Thank you. Well, it is impossible to cover the entire history of Scottish fiddle history in 45 minutes. So I've decided today to focus on the main forms, the birth of fiddling in Scotland, the golden age of the 18th century, and the major composers. And I will, of course, be presenting much of the content in music. But by way of introduction, The violin, as we know it today, arrived in Scotland towards the end of the 17th century, and it had a fairly immediate impact as local craftsmen were able to copy the famous Italian models, particularly from those makers such as Amati and Grunerius. And these instruments could be made relatively cheaply, thus within the reach of all social classes. And in many ways, the arrival of the violin in Scotland was fortuitously well timed, for the 18th century saw a tremendous boom in native arts, particularly dancing. The violin, with its rhythmic attack, flexibility and tonal control, was ideally suited for accompanying this new craze. As is common practice in most indigenous cultures, fiddle music was originally transmitted orally. However, from about the turn of the 18th century, it became customary for fiddlers to transcribe their own personal repertoire into small oblong manuscript books. Indeed, one of the earliest known tunes attributed to an itinerant fiddler is the very famous air Macpherson's Rant, composed in 1700 by the notorious James Macpherson on the eve of his execution in Banff in Scotland. So I'd like to play for you now Macpherson's Lament. Thank you. The first printed collections of Scottish dance music started to appear around 1730, and the first publication of fiddle music per se was a collection of reels and country dances, published in Edinburgh by Robert Bremner in 1757. A profusion of collections then followed from all over the country. The main traditional forms at that time were the jigs, reels, strathspeys and airs. And just to give us an overall understanding of each, I'd like to give you a very quick demonstration of each of the different idioms. Beginning with the jig. So for the musicians amongst us, you probably already know that jigs are in compound time in 6/8. They're very much dance tunes, very bouncy in feel, very jaunty and specifically for dancing. So here's a quick example of a jig. So we have... So there we are, that's the jig. Now the reel is also a very upbeat and lively dance, but it's much more even rhythmed and normally written in 2/4 time with 2 beats in the bar. And reels by their nature are fast and lively. There are many different kinds of reels, but here's an example of one which is a very popular tune in Scotland, Rachel Ray. grasp, that's the rule. And the third idiom I mentioned, possibly the most Scottish, the strathspey, because it is, along with the pibroch, it's the only indigenous form to Scotland. Strathspeys have made it out to the New World, to places like Cape Breton and to Donegal in Ireland, but they're essentially Scottish tunes. And what makes them strathspeys, it's very much the rhythmic structure, the dotted rhythm and the snapped rhythm. So the Scot snap, so prevalent in music generally, is the main ingredient of the strathspey. That's a da-dum, da-da-dum, very, very Scottish in feel. And strathspeys appeared for the first time in the 18th century. So let me give you an example of a strathspey tune. So there we are. I'm sure you get the picture there, and there'll be a lot more strathspeys featured later in the talk. And the final idiom I wanted to touch on is the air. Now, airs come in many, many forms, sometimes referred to as pastorals or elegies or laments, but they are very much for listening as opposed to be danced to. They are very expressive. They're obviously slow. So here's an example of an air. Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned, in the 18th century, these four were the main idioms in Scotland. As I mentioned, it was a prolific period for composition, but above everyone else was the most revered composers of the age and the collections of the great masters. So I would like to feature each of the main exponents and recognise masters one by one, beginning with Neil Gow and his sons. We have also Robert Mackintosh, William Marshall and Simon Fraser. And as I said, I'm going to feature each of these key exponents and let you hear some examples of their music. So, beginning with probably the father figure of the Scots fiddle tradition, Neil Gow. Now, Neil Gow was born in Inver, Perthshire, near Dunkeld on the 22nd of March 1727. And would you believe, only as recently as 3 months ago, the very first statue of Neil Gow was erected in his birthplace. So that's a really significant testament to the man himself, Gow. So violin playing was almost his sole occupation. Although he was not a player of high culture, he displayed in his performance that almost unrestrained abandon, which then, as today, swayed audiences as much as the music itself. In addition, there were undoubtedly certain elements in Neil Gow's playing by which he could give strathspeys and reels an interpretation beyond the powers of any of his contemporaries. Foremost among these was what we call the updriven bow, and that was probably the most recognisable feature in Neil Gow's playing. So, an updriven bow, I'm going to give you a quick example. So, and so on. So, it's a smart lift of the bow off the string and a double upstroke. And again, that will be featured in some tunes later as well. So, whatever Neil Gow's failings, he was still considered to be one of the great popularisers of the Duke of Atholl and other members of the nobility throughout the country. Even today, strathspey and reel enthusiasts are under a huge debt of gratitude to the Dunkeld violinist. Gow died on the 1st of April 1807 and was buried in Little Dunkeld. Now, if this all works, hopefully according to plan, I should be able to share with you an image of Neil Gow. Maybe someone can just give me the thumbs up. You can see that okay.
We can.
Fabulous, that's great. So I would like to play for you now one of the most famous slow airs, if not the most famous, composed by Neil Gow. It's called Neil Gow's Lament for the Death of His Second Wife. But I'm going to precede that with a strathspey written by Gow as well. It's called Highland Whiskey, both very well known tunes. So this is an example of the music of the father of the Scots fiddle tradition, Neil Gow. Thank you. Thank you very much. And moving on now to the next famous composer, Robert Mackintosh. Mackintosh was born in Tullymet in Perthshire in 1745. By 1773, he had settled in Edinburgh and advertised himself as a musician. Besides teaching music, Nathaniel Gow is believed to have been one of his foremost pupils. Mackintosh also held concerts from time to time, and he must have built up for himself quite an enviable reputation as a violinist. Indeed, he was considered Neil Gow's most serious rival as an exponent of Scottish dance music. And Robert Mackintosh published 4 collections of original music. And I would like to play 2 tunes from these collections now. Another strathspey in a different key this time, entitled Miss Marianne Oliphant, And before that, I'm going to play a slow strathspey. A slow strathspey is the same rhythmic structure as the dance strathspey, except played at a slower speed. So it's more for listening purposes as opposed to be danced to. So these two tunes are written by Robert McIntosh. Unfortunately, he's the only composer I don't have an image for. There doesn't seem to be any at all. I've never been aware of any. So if anyone finds a portrait of Robert McIntosh, you can let me know. So here we go then. Miss Campbell of Saddle and Miss Marianne Oliphant. Thank you very much. That was the music of Robert McIntosh of Tullymet. William Marshall was born in Fauquibers, Banffshire, on the 27th of December 1748. When about 12 years of age, he entered the service of the Duke of Gordon and soon rose to be the butler and house steward. Marshall was a great favourite with the members of the Duke's family and with the many distinguished guests, especially the ladies who visited the castle. Many of his compositions are dedicated to the dukes, earls, ladies, marquises and marchionesses. In addition to composing music, Marshall devoted much of his time to the study of mechanics, astronomy, architecture and land surveying, and even to the making of clocks. He was a very keen sportsman, a dancer and an athlete of considerable local repute. Robert Burns proved himself to be a sound judge of Scottish music when he dubbed Marshall the first composer of strathspeys of the age. So I would like to play for you now one of these strathspeys, the epic tune which is known as Craigellachie Brig, one of the most demanding and most revered strathspeys in the Scots fiddle tradition. And I'll follow that up with a jig, also written by William Marshall, called Miss Hannah of Elgin. And here he is, the man himself, William Marshall. Hold on tight, here we go. Thank you. So I'm sure you can see that Craigellachie Brig is a bit of a workout as Strathspeys go. It's a really powerful, demanding tune, but lots of fun. Thank you. Okay, the next significant composer and one of the most cultured is Nathaniel Gow, fourth son of Neil Gow, who was also born in Inver on the 28th of May 1763. He and his elder brothers, William, John and Andrew, chose music as their profession. In 1782, Nathaniel received a permanent appointment as one of the Royal Herald Trumpeters for Scotland, and in 1796, in partnership with William Shepherd, he started a very extensive business as music seller with premises in Edinburgh. As an arranger and composer of Scottish music, Nathaniel Gow displays more culture than perhaps any of his predecessors due to his better musical training. Of the 20-odd collections of music he arranged, the most important are Gow's 6 collections of Strathspeys, containing in all over 560 tunes. These volumes were a distinct advance on the few previous Scots collections and were regarded as the chief standard of reference until about 1840. Through his publications alone, Nathaniel Gow has won for himself a distinguished place in the history of Scots music. So, once again, I'm going to feature some music composed by Nathaniel Gow, including one of my own personal favourite tunes, the lovely slow air, Coilsfield House. Now, Coilsfield House is now a ruin, but it's only about 10 miles from where I live in the southwest in Ayr. So it's a very popular slow air worldwide. And just before I play Coilsfield House, I'm going to play another Strathspey, a very graceful tune written by Nathaniel Gow, a very cultured tune, Lady Charlotte Campbell. And hopefully this time we can see the man himself. There we are, Nathaniel Gow. Sorry about that. Here we go. Nathaniel Gow. Thank you very much. Nathaniel Gow. Okay, there's one other 18th century fiddler I'd like to feature, slightly lesser known, but a very influential character nonetheless, Captain Simon Fraser. He was born in Ardachie in Inverness-shire in 1773. He became a very talented fiddler at a young age, like his father and grandfather before. It was from them that he learned, composed and collected more than 230 tunes, which were published in the epic and very important book, The Airs and Melodies, peculiar to the Highlands of Scotland and the Isles. That's a bit of a mouthful. Most people just call it the Simon Fraser Collection. It was published in 1816. And I would like to play two tunes from that particular collection, one of which I'm actually going to be recording this coming Friday. I'm involved in a project at the moment to record an album in celebration of the 250th anniversary of the death of Walter Scott. And it's been commissioned by the Royal Scottish Country Dance Society in Scotland. And all the music is from the 18th century in period style. So it's myself, a pianist and a cellist. So we'll be recording over the next couple of weeks. And that's a new album to look out for. So I'm going to play the tune in question. It's called The Haggis, which is a reel. And I'll follow that up with another slow suspect in the key of E flat major this time, for those musicians amongst us, and it's called The Beauty of the North. So both of these tunes composed by Simon Fraser. And here he is. Okay, here we go. Thank you very much. That was The Beauty of the North and The Haggis Reel by Captain Simon Fraser. Well, by around 1820, the great fiddle era was past as new dances and fashions arrived in Scotland. Quadrilles, polkas, mazurkas. Fiddle music retreated for the moment to the grassroots of indigenous culture at fireside ceilidhs, country weddings and the like. Many fine fiddlers still carried on the tradition, however. Later, the focal point of traditional fiddle music was to shift from Perthshire to the northeast of Scotland, and it was there that it reached its peak in popularity in the late 19th century, mainly through the career of one man who made it commercially successful, the legendary James Scott Skinner, the Strathspey King. A name I'm sure familiar to some of you. Scott Skinner was born in Bankery in 1843, and he was taught to play the fiddle and cello at a very young age. By the age of 10, he was sent to Manchester to play in a leading juvenile orchestra and continued to study classical violin. He won a major fiddle competition in Inverness at the age of 19 against some of the top players of the day. Scott Skinner made a comfortable living as a teacher and dancing master. He toured extensively, even to the USA, performing a mixture of classical and traditional music. He was a prolific composer with over 600 pieces in print in 6 different collections. He died in 1927, the last of the truly great fiddle composers. Skinner's training as a classical violinist is evident in many of his tunes, which are more technically demanding, with new forms, a greater range of pitch, chromaticism, left-hand pizzicato, and more advanced bowing techniques. So I'm going to play 3 such tunes now from Scott Skinner, and here he is. The first tune I'm going to play is a slow air called Fyvie Castle. Now, if you've ever visited Fyvie Castle before, it's owned by the National Trust for Scotland, and it's rumoured to be the most haunted building in Scotland. And I think that's reflected in the music, if you listen out for that. The second tune from Scott Skinner I'm going to play is a new form, the 4/4 March, which was kind of conceived by Skinner and has been carried on to this to nowadays. It's a march with variations. And the final tune is a popular reel which has been recorded widely all over the world called The Hurricane. So a feature on the music of James Scott Skinner this time. Thank you. Well, that's the main feature on the main influential composers of the golden age of the fiddle tradition in Scotland. Before we finish, there is one other revered fiddle tradition I would like to feature, that of the Shetland Islands. Now, the indigenous music of Shetland is, strictly speaking, culturally different from the music of the mainland, with its origins in Scandinavia. Indeed, Shetland was part of Norway until annexed to Scotland in 1612. One of the characteristics of the early primitive fiddles in Shetland was the use of unstopped strings as drones, creating a similar effect to the sympathetic strings of the Norwegian hardanger fiddle. This effect is still practiced today, which gives Shetland music a rich and infectious harmonic texture. The driven bow, which I illustrated earlier, so fundamental to the mainland player, was never practiced in Shetland. Many of the Shetland tunes and their titles reflect the rich cultural life of the islands, where music played such a natural part at various celebrations such as Christmas, weddings and regattas. The tune forms are also different from the mainland, with the reel being by far the most common form. Other old Shetland tunes are highly descriptive, often depicting elements of island life, such as spinning, seafaring and fishing. It was not uncommon for Shetlanders to take fiddlers to sea with them on long voyages to while away the hours. No doubt these fiddlers met and exchanged tunes with other fishermen from other nations, for example, Greenland and Norway. This, together with early gramophone recordings of mainland virtuosos like Scott Skinner, introduced new techniques and styles to Shetland. But to illustrate the cultural difference in the music, I would like to play three very descriptive and old tunes from the Shetland tradition, beginning with a very atmospheric slow tune entitled Da Day Dawn. Now, Da Day Dawn was traditionally the first tune played in Shetland in Christmas morning. And I'll follow that with a tune which, the story goes that Shetland fishermen learned this particular melody from the Eskimos, who sang it, had lyrics apparently in the Yaqui tongue. I'm not sure if anyone speaks Yaqui, I don't, but they took the tune back to Shetland. So it's called the Greenland Man's tune. And the very last tune I'm going to play is a real, very descriptive of the Shetland style with the ringing strings and the drones, and it's called Pharaoh Rum. So you'll hear, hopefully, the difference culturally in the music and the style of these tunes, but such a living tradition today, the music of the Shetland Islands. I've had the pleasure of visiting Shetland. I've lost count of the number of times, probably in excess of 25 times over the years, so an amazing place for fiddlers. So here we go, a medley of tunes from Shetland. Thank you. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the music of Shetland. Now, as I mentioned right at the beginning, we could spend the rest of the week talking about other fiddle styles and contemporary developments and what's been happening in the past 50 years. There's been a massive boom in Celtic music and all forms, especially fiddle, over recent times. And I have the pleasure of tutoring at the Royal Conservatoire in Glasgow. And we have more and more fiddlers joining our courses each year, including a few from the USA. I have students at the moment from North Carolina and Florida, and it's fabulous just to look at the impact that Scottish fiddling has had worldwide. When I was younger, I had the privilege of being a member of the Scottish Fiddle Orchestra for some 19 years, and had the privilege of playing solo at a very young age in some of the major concert halls in the UK and abroad. So that was a real special time for me. And that's one thing which we haven't had time to feature today, but the birth of the Fiddle Society and the Fiddle Orchestra. They come under many umbrellas. Sometimes they're called Strathspey Real Societies, sometimes they're called Fiddle Orchestras, sometimes they're called Fiddle Workshop. But essentially, it's a mass group of fiddlers who all meet with a common interest. So just to finish off the presentation today, I'm going to play you a clip of the Scottish Fiddle Orchestra in full flight. Before I do that, I would like to say a sincere thanks to the Chicago Scots, and particularly Connie and Jack, for assisting me with today's presentation, and in the first instance for inviting me along. It's been a real pleasure to share some music with you today, and I really hope you've enjoyed it. So before we finish, as I said, a wee clip of the Scottish Fiddle Orchestra. Enjoy this, and I'll be sticking around for a few questions very soon. Just have to make sure that you guys can hear this. Bear with me. Hopefully this time.
Can't hear anything, Alistair.
Let me just double check, Jack. I did share the sound, but it doesn't matter. If it doesn't work out, I'll play something myself to round off things. Let's just have one more go. So we have to share screen. I think all I have to do is share sound. Yeah, check that. Hopefully that. Okay. Okay. Take two. If it doesn't work this time, I'll play something instead. Okay. Okay, now, I'm not sure if you guys could hear anything there. Apologies if you couldn't.
We could hear.
Yes, we could. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So let's open it up to question and answer here for Alistair. Alistair, I just want to say that was delightful, and I hope it's kind of a shame that everybody has our microphones muted, because I know we just were all want to give you a round of applause and appreciation. We couldn't be more delighted with that performance. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
And if everyone will bring your video cameras back so we can see you, and let's open the floor so we can have a little back and forth discussion with Alistair.
Alistair, you mentioned the Shetlands, but has there been other outside influence on fiddle, Scottish fiddle music, such as from Scottish travelers or from other parts of the continent?
Not so much. I mean, it's most prevalent in Shetland because of the Scandinavian link to the islands. And interestingly, Orkney, which is not too far from Shetland, has a very, very different tradition. The Orkney style, I mean, it's a much more modern day style, and their music has lots of waltzes and polkas. It's a very lilting, gentle style in comparison to the Shetland style. But I mean, sure, with modern day technology, I mean, it's inevitable that influences will appear from other parts of the world. But certainly, the mainstay of the Scottish fiddle repertoire, which made up the main part of the presentation, that's remained unchanged from outside influence for a long time. Although in the modern day, these tunes of Nathaniel Gow and William Marshall can be taken and arranged in a more contemporary way, but the melody lines remain the same, so they're not compromised in any way.
Thanks.
Sure.
You know, I'll jump in for a minute. Alistair joined us here in Chicago prior to the COVID outbreak, when he performed at a number of fundraiser dinners around the country. And he was playing the Grieg violin, which was the personal violin of Robert Burns. Alistair, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling us a little something about, there's the Grieg violin. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that experience, and also about the instrument you're playing today and why you chose it and so forth. That would be interesting.
Well, thanks for bringing it. I was hoping someone would mention that, Connie. As you can see, I had the Grieg violin at my fingertips there. So in actual fact, I'm playing it on Thursday this week for the first time since January. All I know is I'm performing for a very, very famous person I suspect is a member of the royal family. But I'll find out tomorrow who it's actually going to be. So I'll be at the Burns Museum this Thursday. And I've even been given a music request from the said individual. So I'll let you know who it turns out to be.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. But the instrument itself, it was recovered from a farmhouse in the village of Mauchline about 25 years ago. And it was in bits at that point. But there was evidence with the instrument that it belonged to William Grieg. Now, William Grieg was dance teacher to Robert Burns. Now, Burns, when he was 19, a young man, he used to attend the weekly dance classes at the Bachelors Club in Turbolton. I think he claimed to his father that he was going along to brush up on his manners, but it was probably an excuse to meet up with the local young ladies, knowing Burns. So William Grieg played that very instrument at the dance classes, and it's known that Burns played the fiddle himself, so you would like to think that at some point he had his hands on it, he played a few tunes. But the National Trust for Scotland took ownership of the instrument about 10, 12 years ago, and it resides as an exhibit at the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum in Alloway. And about 6 or 7 times a year, I'm very honoured to be allowed to play it. And the tour that Connie mentioned was in celebration of 20 years of the US foundation of the National Trust for Scotland. And we took the instrument all round the country, travelling into not only Chicago, but New York, Boston, Washington, DC, and Los Angeles. So it was a whistle-stop tour of the US in January, which was amazing. It was a great experience. So hopefully it'll happen.
It was very memorable for us, I assure you.
Sure, but it's a
Lovely.
I was going to say that the instrument itself, as you can see, it's very ornate. it's actually quite difficult to play. It's a bit like an old car. I mean, you have to treat it with respect. And I've been playing it for long enough to know its kind of idiosyncrasies. So I know what doesn't work on it and what I can play on it. In fact, tomorrow, I'm going to nip into the museum tomorrow afternoon just to get it out of the glass case, to have a quick tune on it, just to make sure it's still in plain order before Thursday.
Beautiful.
We had a question in the chat here. Margaret Zook asked, is the difference between a fiddle and a violin simply the type of music it used for? And actually, I was wondering the same thing. What's the distinction there between a fiddle and a violin?
Yeah, so it's a question I'm often asked, and you're absolutely right. There's no distinction. A violin and a fiddle essentially are the same thing, and it is very much the music that's performed. Like, I suppose the word violin is more synonymous with classical styles, whereas fiddle is used for more indigenous and folk styles. That said, the way instruments are set up can vary a little bit in terms of small things like the type of strings that are used and the action on the instrument and the sound that you're looking for. Fiddlers tend to favour maybe a slightly sharper sound. Not in all cases, but a sharper sound is good for to play the fast tunes, the jigs and the reels. Classical players might go for a more sort of mellow sound. Again, that's a bit of a generalisation. Good question.
Alistair, as a woodwind player, I obviously don't bow a stringed instrument, but I noticed your hand position is very different from what you see with a classical violin. Did they end up with that hand position to enable the rhythmic work, or is it just custom?
Well, I don't think I conform to any specific technique. It's just something that's evolved over a long time. And I guess, like, when I was being classically trained when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I probably had a much more classical technique than I do now. But I've kind of, because I play primarily traditional music, I've kind of unconsciously adapted to the music, particularly my right hand. My wrist is a bit looser than most classical players, and classical players ask me about it all the time, and that allows me to play really fast. But yeah, it's not a conscious thing, but I suppose by way of comparison, if you look along the line of the string section in a symphony orchestra, most of the violinists have a very similar technique. It needs that for uniformity in the orchestra. Whereas if you take a fiddle society, there can be quite a lot of variations on technique, which is quite interesting. Like some of the professional fiddle bands in Scotland at the current time, bands like Blazing Fiddles or Session A9, all the fiddlers have slightly different techniques, but it sounds great, so that's the main thing. Thank you.
Don't be shy. This is your chance.
I'll ask one if it's all right. So Alistair, thanks for starting with McPherson's rant. I actually played that a couple of times as my air in competition. Yeah, and I was just wondering what your take is on the oft-repeated assertion that Paddy Burney composed the Auld Men's Deed as the first Strathspey. How seriously do you take that piece of folklore?
I couldn't really give a definitive answer. In my eyes, I would probably claim that the first Strathspey was possibly Tullochgorum. That's certainly, along with Caberfeidh, which is a tune that appears in many forms, not only a march in Strathspey, but also a reel. So there is evidence in print that the first two published tunes in Scotland were Tullochgorum and Caberfeidh. So to answer your question, I'm not entirely sure, but going back to McPherson's Lament, again, you hear so many different versions of it, both the vocal melody and the fiddle tune. I must confess, it's not a tune I ever play. Just because it was one of the very first tunes attributed to someone, to James McPherson in 1700, I thought it would be an appropriate tune to play. So I wasn't quite sure what key to play it in. I played it in G major. Do you have a specific key?
I like it in G major as well. It's usually transcribed in G major. There's a very intricate B flat version in Gal's repository
I know the one.
that I kind of monkeyed around with, but ultimately decided to stick with the G major, which is, I think, more accessible and more people know the G major. So I like it in G major too.
Yeah, and I think with that kind of tune, there's no point in looking for anything hidden. It's a very simple tune, and that's part of the appeal of it. It's a beautiful melody. Just let the melody do the talking. It's not about the complexity musically of the piece.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's the story that goes along with it. So usually what I did in competition was I played it like very slowly and very quietly the first time, which is kind of, my idea was that was McPherson being led to the gallows. And then since McPherson had a reputation for being a firebrand, the second time through, I did it with a lot of drones and double stops and very angry. And then the third time, I thought of him as kind of swinging from the gallows and the crowd, the hushed silence of the crowd. So I kind of like went back down and just played it very quietly and softly again. So I had a lot of fun with it. And I was complimented on how well I handled the storytelling of the air with that. So the technique and the intonation, not so much, but they liked the storytelling.
Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
You mentioned basically four kinds of fiddle music, and you were talking about the reel, the Strathspey, the jig, and the air. Now, I am more introduced to Scottish fiddle music through American fiddle music, which seems to be just almost totally Scottish, except, but somehow Strathspey didn't seem to make it here. And, but hornpipes did, and you didn't mention hornpipes. But the hornpipes get turned into reels on this side of the.
It's interesting, actually. To say there's only four forms in the 18th century is not strictly true. I mean, the four I mentioned, the jig, reel, Strathspey, and air, are the four most common. But if you look through some of the old manuscripts, particularly Mackintosh, Robert Mackintosh was well known for composing minuets and gavottes, and very much in the style of the classical composers of the day, Haydn and such people. Marches didn't really appear until later, although Gow did write the occasional march, but marches kind of appeared along with Scott Skinner, like the last, the medley of tunes I played from Scott Skinner, that featured a march which was in a different style. And hornpipes, again, Skinner wrote many hornpipes, and they were around for a little bit of time before then, but if you look through the Gows and Frasers and Mackintoshes, there's no real evidence of hornpipes as such. But there are other types of tunes as well, of course. We didn't even get as far as talking about pipe tunes, and that's a different talk altogether. I mean, the link between the bagpipe and the fiddle in Scotland has a long history, and many of the tunes that fiddlers play are pipe tunes, many of which are marches in a very different style from the ones I played earlier.
There's another.
I'm sorry, George. After George completes, I noticed Judy had her hand up and so did Lynn. But go ahead, George. Go ahead, George.
Oh, okay. The other thing that is a little different to us is that the U.S. The mountain music from the Southern Appalachians and the Ozarks, it's Scottish fiddle music, but there's nothing written down, not at all. They have no concept that there were composers for any of this stuff. It's all passed on orally. Nobody would know most of the fiddlers wouldn't know what to do with a piece of sheet music.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It is that way, even in the education sector in Scotland. There's a whole series of workshops that are conducted, which are all done by ear, so there's no sheet music. There's two sides to the argument. I think being a reader is very handy, obviously, as a musician, but if you play by ear, it gives you a certain freedom and makes you think more possible about your expression and musicality, which is such an integral part of the music. Interesting.
Judy, did you have a question? I see her hand, but are you trying to unmute, Judy? How about you, Lynn? You had your hand up? People may be having technical difficulties. Sometimes that happens. They have control, right, Jack?
They do.
Okay.
If you go to the bottom left corner of your screen, you'll see the mute button. You can press that to mute and unmute yourself. Bottom left.
Well, I have another little question, Alistair. I just have to ask. So how did you get interested in the violin and the cello and make music your career? I'm sure as a young lad, but what exactly did transpire there?
Yeah, well, I started learning the violin when I was 9, and my late grandmother gave me an instrument not long before she passed away, and I had lessons at that time in classical violin. But my dad, my late father, he played the bagpipes and the fiddle, and he was heavily involved with the local fiddle societies. And so at a very young age, he had me along playing, and there was lots of trad music in the house when there was lots of visitors to the family home and lots of music played. So I was always interested. I was always into it, and very quickly I'd only been playing a matter of months when I realised that I really wanted to go down the fiddling route. So I did all the classical exams until I finished at university. But my heart always kind of lay in the fiddle world. So that's how it all kind of started off. And I spent many years playing in Strathspey societies and fiddle societies and orchestras. And I'm still an honorary member of the Scottish Fiddle Orchestra. So I'm thinking I might perform with them in December. They have a concert in the Usher Hall in Edinburgh. So I have a lot of friends in the orchestra. So it's a great.
I attended that Usher Hall concert about 3 years ago at Christmas time.
Oh, wow.
I went over for Hogmanay. Yeah, it was lovely.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Everyone wore their clan tartans.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Very festive.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I've been very lucky. I mean, it's given me the chance to travel all around the world and some very interesting places. And I've published books and I've recorded and broadcast and been involved in lots of interesting projects. So yeah, I'm glad I stuck at it. So I'm very fortunate to do what I do.
We are so glad you stuck at it. So are we able to give Alistair a round of applause, at least visually? It must be so strange not to get the applause. But we just couldn't be more delighted, Alistair, to have you with us today. This has just been a real pleasure and a treat. And I must promise you, we have to have you here in Chicago once the COVID is behind us and have you perform live and be able to interface with you again. So we'll plan on that and we'll definitely be in touch.
That would be wonderful. I would love to come back to Chicago. I think I said to you when I was there 2 years ago, I'd been to all the other cities in the US before, but it was my first time in Chicago and it was brilliant. A wonderful time. So hopefully in the not too distant future.
John, did you have a question? I see your hand up.
No, I was just going to say thanks to you for organizing this, Connie. You and Jack.
It's absolutely our pleasure. Okay, friends. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting today if there's no other discussion with Alistair. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month. And Alistair, you're always invited as well. Same time, same station. But if there's nothing else today, we'll go ahead and adjourn. If anybody wants to communicate with Alistair and needs his contact information or so forth, please reach out to me. I'll provide that. But we're just very grateful, Alistair, and wish you a lovely day and weekend, and it's a holiday weekend here for us, so we have Monday off. But we just can't thank you enough. So
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alistair.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
be well, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.